Hey guys, it's Ernesto. Welcome back to another Monday critique video. I hope you guys are having a fantastic Monday. I'm having a wonderful Monday. Today we have two fantastic images to critique, and I cannot wait to get into it. So after this intro, let's dive into it. If you guys want to submit your image to be critiqued, please join our Facebook group. It's called Fine Art Photography and Modeling. In that group, I created a specific thread where you could submit your images to be critiqued. All right, guys, welcome back. So we have a wonderful image that was submitted by this gentleman. Thank you very much, Mario. Mario has become a veteran of the Monday critique video. Go and check out last Monday critique video of Mario's image critique. So let's jump into the light in this image. When Mario submitted this image, he did mention that he utilized one speed light in this image, and that one speed light was positioned to camera right. I suppose that the light was being utilized more as a light to help separate the subject from the background and not as the main light. And the reason I say that is because it doesn't seem like that light is doing anything but trying to separate the subject from the background. So that being said, now let's talk about that, right? So the fact that that light is positioned behind the subject, what appears to be behind the subject, it's kind of creating this harsh, hard line light on the subject's face, which is kind of distracting, right? So from a lighting perspective, I think if you position the light a little bit more to the left or right, or have the subject turn their face a little bit more so that that light doesn't hit their face, I think you would have had a better lighting setup in this image. Now, another thing that's a little bit distracting with respect to the light is that the light is also hitting that pole, which is to camera right. Now, the fact that it's hitting that pole creates a little bit of a distraction. Whenever you're looking at an image, every time you always focus in, the viewer always focus in on the brightest area of that image, because as photographers, what we do is basically we paint with light. And when we paint with light, light is what helps draw the viewer into that particular area of the image that you want them to view. So if you have a bright area in that image, what you're telling the viewer is basically, hey, look over this way, look where the light is, look where that is, and look in that direction. So if that's not what your intent is, you got to make sure that when you're lighting your subject using artificial light or natural light, whatever light it is, you got to make sure that your subject is the brightest part of the image. If anything else is brighter, it's just going to be a distraction. It's going to be distracting people away from what you want them to view. So that's what I would say with respect to the light. Now, with respect to the natural light, because now I think you're using the natural light in this image to help, be the main light for your subject. So with respect to that light, I don't think we found actually the good quality of light to basically be on the subject. So I would have first find some good quality of light to hit the subject, because right now the light that's hitting the subject, the natural light that's hitting the subject, is very flat light. It's not adding any depth and dimension to the subject. So that's what I would have done first, try to find that element of light that adds some depth and dimension to the subject, then add the artificial light to help add that separation. So hunting for light is very important, especially when you're dealing with natural light. You want to find good quality of light. Not just because you could see, something doesn't mean that it's good quality of light. How you basically judge good quality of light, at least for me, I judge good quality of light by putting my subject in that light. Okay? And then I look at the subject and I say, is that good light on my subject? How is the shadows falling on my subject? If the shadows are harsh, sharp, then I know that I need to basically, either move my subject or add a diffuser or add some additional light to help the natural light create that good quality of light that I want on my subject. Now, if that light is not good, if it's too flat, is not adding too much depth and dimension, I move on. Find somewhere else, find a different location. So that's what I would have suggested you would have done in this particular image with your subject. Move on to a different location to find the better quality of light for your subject with respect to the natural light, given that the natural light was your main light. So that's all I have to say with respect to the light in this image, and I hope that was helpful. All right, guys, so now let's move on to the pose in this image. So from a posing perspective, I really like this pose. It's really nice. I really like all the lines that you have going on here. I love how she have her legs positioned, one leg out and one leg bent. I mean, I like that. That's basically draws you in right there. Another thing that I just like how the fact she have a hand in her hair. That's a nice real touch there. I like that. There's only two things that I would adjust in this image from a posing perspective. One, I would have tried to bend her left elbow a little bit. Right now it's a little bit too straight for me. So I would just like to add just a little bit of shape to her hand. And I think that would have break down this pose just a little bit more and make it a little bit more inviting. When you have like straight limbs and stuff like that, it just basically creates like a barrier, in my view anyways, to the subject. So that's the only thing I would have done there with respect to her hand. So another thing that I would have done with respect to the pose in this image is just have the subject tilt her chin down a little. And that would have helped create a little bit more connection between the viewer and the subject, okay? So, but other than that, guys, look, this is an awesome pose. So I will move on from here. All right, guys, now let's move on to the composition in this image. So from a compositional perspective, overall, Mario, I think your composition is great. There's only one thing that I would have done with respect to your composition to help with the lighting in this image. And camera right, that light that's hitting the pole, if I noticed that that was happening with my composition, I would have basically come in a little bit closer to crop off that light that's hitting that pole so that that light is not as distracting. And from a compositional perspective, that would have been all I would have done to help with this image. And that's it. I think your composition is totally great. So I'll move on. All right, guys, now let's move on to image number 2. So this image was submitted by this gentleman. Thank you very much, Jaden, for submitting your image. Now let's dive into it. So the very first thing we're gonna start with is light. When Jaden submitted this image, he did mention that he utilized 2 speed lights in this image. So when I look at this image, I don't see any evidence of 2 speed lights. There's just a couple of things that's going on here from a lighting perspective, which I think we could have adjusted or make better utilizing those 2 light sources for this image. So the first thing I notice in this image is that it's a little bit dark. Now, you could have a very dramatic image that's dark, but there's a couple of things that you have to keep in mind when you're basically working with dramatic dark images, right? And that is details, okay? And what I mean by details is not, putting little elements into your shot to help add details to it. What I mean is adding details in your shadows, right? So right now your shadows appears to be a little bit crushed. And I think if you were to add just a little bit of light to that area, it would have helped just add more detail to it. It'll still be dark, it will still be dramatic, but you at least see the details. Like when you're walking about, at night, you could see details in, dark areas, right? You could see it with your naked eyes. So when you're creating an image, that's what you try to go for. You try to go for getting some of that details in the shadows. So that would be the first thing that I would try to fix if I looked at the back of my camera and I noticed that, hey, I wasn't getting much detail there. I would have probably utilized that second light source to help add a little bit more detail there, or utilizing my shutter speed, basically dropping that a little bit more to bring in a little bit more light into the image, which would then add a little bit more detail in that area. So that's what I would have done to help with the details for this image. All right, so another thing that I noticed in this image, keeping on the theme of details here, is that if you look at the sky, I'm not really sure when you shot this image, if it was high noon, late in the afternoon, I'm not really sure. But right now, when I look at this image, there's just bright light with not a lot of detail in it. Actually, probably no detail in the sky. So what I would have tried to have done here, I think you shot this at f4. My suggestion would have been to shot this maybe at, you know, f8 or something like that, just to get some more detail in that sky. Now, I'm not really sure how powerful your speed lights are. Usually speed lights are not that powerful, but if you were to bump up your, you know, your f-stop to, you know, f8 or something like that, that would mean you would have to push out a little bit more power on your speed lights, right? So that's the struggle with speed lights, right? So speed lights, it's not really that powerful enough to overpower, quote unquote, overpower the sun. So you have to really pick and choose when and where to utilize speed lights. I love utilizing speed lights because it's the most efficient thing for me, right? I don't like walking around with a whole bunch of strobes. I may change that position at some point in the future, but right now that works out for me. So when I generally utilize speed lights is not in where I can, you know, overpower the sun. I cannot really defeat that sun because my speed lights is not that strong enough to overpower it. And you know, the term overpower, all that means is simply if you're exposing for the sky, right? And if that sky is very, very bright, meaning like if it's high noon and that sun is just blazing, you know, your speed lights, because you're exposed for the sky, you're gonna have a proper exposure for the sky. When you introduce your speed lights, even if it's on the highest power, your speed lights is not gonna help you to be able to add any light to your subject. It's gonna add just maybe like a poof of light to your subject. So your subject is still gonna be in silhouette. So if you had like a strobe or something like that, that's a little bit more powerful, the strobe will help, you know, add a lot more light to your subject. So now you have a properly well exposed image from a sky perspective and from your subject perspective. So the way I generally utilize my speed lights is not trying to compete with the sun at all, because I won't be able to win that battle. The only thing I utilize my speed light for is to just help add a little bit more depth and dimension to my image. And also, you know, when the sun is not as strong, I can still get some of that detail in the sky and still utilize the speed light to help add light to my subject. So now I have a very well exposed sky and a very well exposed subject, okay? So with respect to your image, I don't think you'll be able to utilize your speed lights to help overpower that sun in the background there. It seems to be a little bit powerful. So what I would have suggested is probably changing your composition, which we'll get to. But with respect to your light, so right now you have that light positioned to camera left, okay? So I would have positioned that light to camera right. And if I position that light to camera right, assuming you maintain that very same pose that the subject have right now, that would add the light coming in from camera right, and that would add a little bit of shadow on the left side of the subject, which is the right side of the subject actually. So that would add that little bit of shadow, which would add a little bit more depth and dimension on your subject. And that's what I would have done there. That would have been the first thing I would have done. Secondly, going back to that shadow detail, if you can't use your shutter speed to help add that detail into that shadow area, I would have utilized that second light to add some details into that shadow. All right, so if you were able to utilize your shutter speed to add a little bit more detail in the shadow area of this image, I would have taken that second speed light and positioned it to camera left directly behind the subject to add just a little bit of light on the subject's hair and her shoulders to help separate her a little bit more from the background. So that's how I would have utilized the second light source in this image. And I think with those minor adjustments or those adjustments, I think from a lighting perspective, I think your image would have been a little bit better. Right now, I just don't feel like the two speed lights in this image were utilized effectively. I think if you had adjusted it in the fashion that I just described, it would have helped in this image. So that's all I have to say with respect to the lighting in this image. We'll move on. All right, guys, now let's move on to the posing in this image. So from a posing perspective, when I look at this image, I feel from a posing perspective, it's more of like a candid type shot. It seems like you caught the subject in between doing something. So here's what I would have done to enhance the pose just a little bit more. The first thing I would have done is her knee that's a little bit elevated right now, the knee that's closest to the camera. I will basically drop her knee down a little bit so it's not as high, right? So I'll just bring her leg down just a little bit, still bent, but I'll just bring it down a little bit more to a comfortable position, because right now it just feels to be a little bit uncomfortable. So other thing I would have done with respect to the pose, and I know this is not a posing thing, but I would have tightened up her shirt just a little bit. It seems like some of the wind caught the shirt a little bit and is giving her the appearance of it being fuller than she actually is. So I would just tighten her shirt just a little bit more, or wait till that wind went away and took the shot again. The other thing I would have done is the hair that's basically hanging on her right shoulder, which is camera left, I would have moved that over to her left shoulder, like, you know, basically take all of her hair and move it over to her left shoulder so you could see more of the subject's neck. So that's what I would have done there. So another thing that I would have done is respect to her hands. So her hands right now, especially the left hand, just appears to be a little bit awkwardly positioned. And because it's leaning towards the camera, it just seems to be a little bit longer than it needs to be. Because I think because of that wide angle that you have there. So what I would have done is this. Because I would have maintained her face exactly the way it is, because going back to my lighting suggestion, which is to have that light on camera right, her face have to be positioned in that direction so that it could get hit with the light, right? So if I'm maintaining her face in the same direction, just to make this pose a little bit more intimate and a little bit more elegant, what I would have done is just have her cross her arms, right? Just cross her arms like she's embracing herself, or she's a little bit chilly or something like that. And having her cross her arms, eyes down, and facing in that direction, that would help make this pose just a little bit more inviting and not as appear to be as candid as it is right now. So those are the things that I would have done with respect to the posing in this image, and I hope that was helpful. All right, guys, now moving on to the composition in this image. So from a compositional perspective, I really like the low angle in this image, the low angle shooting up. Actually, I don't do a lot of those, but meaning low angle shooting up. I don't know why that's funny, but it's funny to me for whatever reason. But I really like it. I like the low angle. The other thing is I like how you frame the subject up, having the subject on the left-hand side and then having some interest on the right-hand side. The only thing that's a little bit distracted to me is obviously that white sky that's in the background is just a little bit distracted. So if you can change your composition for whatever reason to help eliminate that sky, what I would have done in post is basically utilize the cloning tool or the healing tool to help basically clone that environment in so that it's not distracting me away from my subject. So by doing that, the only problem that you will encounter is that your subject is going to get lost in the background because of the lighting setup that you have in this image. So I think from a lighting perspective, if you make those adjustments from the lighting perspective and you couldn't change your composition, cloning that background in would help, you know, just help focus the attention on the subject. But because of how the lighting is right now, I wouldn't suggest cloning in this image right now, because if you do that, your subject is going to get completely lost in that background. So don't do that in this image. But you know, next time if you do those proper lighting setup, and you cannot change your position by eliminating that sky or underexposing that sky and utilizing your artificial light to basically help, add some light into that subject, that's what I would have done there from a compositional perspective and from a post-production perspective to help just focus the attention on the subject. So that's all I have to say with respect to your composition. Hope that was helpful. Let's move on. All right, guys, now let's move on to the rating of these two images. So the first image on deck is Mario's. Light. This image received a rating of 2. Pose. This image received a rating of 4. Composition. This image received a rating of 4. Overall, this image received a rating of 3.33 out of 5. All right, guys, now let's move on to image number 2. Light. This image received a rating of 2. Pose. This image received a rating of 2. Composition. This image received a rating of 4. Overall, this image received a rating of 2.66 out of 5. Thank you very much, guys, for submitting an image. I sincerely appreciate it. I hope what I had to say today was helpful to the image creators, and I hope it was helpful to you, the viewers. Guys, if you have any feedback that you'd like to provide about what I had to say or about these images, please drop it down below, because it would not only help me, but it would also help the image creators. So, thank you very much. That is it. Thank you very much for watching this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with your friends and family. And please put some feedback down below and let me know what you think about this video. And guys, if you got this far in the video, you must be enjoying this content and you must be enjoying this channel. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next Monday.